Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
In the next several days to a week or so, we're going to continue to see things go up. We cannot be discouraged by that because the mitigation is actually working.
The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals. I'm moving forward with vaccination requirements wherever I can.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Otto. Welcome to episode 6 of COVID Secrets. Since the start of this so-called pandemic, tons of information has surfaced that makes it clear that COVID is more than a coincidence. Big Pharma and the media have gone to great lengths to suppress any information about the truth. If you do a Google search on any of these topics, you'll find endless blogs and articles talking about how there is no hidden agenda, that the COVID vax is not dangerous, and that anyone who speaks against the evil plans of Big Pharma and the government are labeled as conspiracy theorists. This begs the question, why won't a Google search show blogs and articles that question the pandemic and the safety and effectiveness of vaccines? The reality is that Big Pharma is so powerful that they control the media and they control the information that we have access to. If there was nothing to hide, they wouldn't have to censor scientists and other experts who question their methods. We've heard from our experts that prove over and over again that Big Pharma and the government are using the media to spread misinformation and falsify data. They've done independent and literature research that has proven their current response to the pandemic is based on lies and ineffective and harmful protocols. The big question is why. More and more doctors and scientists are working together to answer this question. We've had the privilege of getting insight from experts who have been in the front line of the pandemic and who have seen the truth behind the hidden agenda. We'll share their advice during this episode. Let's start with Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who gives us information about engineering viruses for cross-species transfer. He also discusses how effective treatments have been suppressed as Big Pharma is scared that people would become hesitant to get the COVID vax. Then Dr. Andrew Wakefield deep dives into a popular debate about whether COVID really came from a lab in Wuhan and reveals the startling truth. He talks about how the virus has completely turned the world upside down and how there's been a recent uprising during the pandemic as people have started to challenge Big Pharma and the government by questioning their diabolical hidden agenda, and rightly so. Dr. Zelenko, thank you so much for taking the time.
Nice to meet you. Again.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you for your generosity with your time and your commitment to humanity and what you're doing. Let's have a look at some of the things you presented today. Would you lead into some of the big new findings and perceptions that you've been reflecting at this point in time?
Well, I've been trying to understand the forest for the trees, basically reverse engineer a complex and really what I consider the worst crime in human history. And there's certain connecting the dots that I've been able to do. And so, for example, there's a 20-year patent trail that describes the development of a weapon of mass destruction called COVID-19. There's nothing natural about it, and it was modified in stages over 20 years and then deployed on humanity. But what I didn't realize that what I used in March 2020 to develop my treatment protocol was a paper talking about zinc and zinc ionophores. But I didn't realize who the author was, which was Dr. Ralph Barrick of that paper. Now that name should mean something because at every single stage of the development of this weapon of mass destruction, Dr. Ralph Barrick from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill was the author of the papers with other scientists, but he is the consistent name, and it was all funded by the United States government, NIH and other sources. So what I found unbelievable was that in 1998 and 99, they figured out cross species transfer. In other words, I'll give you an example. Take a rabbit virus and make it infect a horse. Something weird like that. In other words, converting a virus into another type of same virus but infects another species. That was done in 98, 99. In 2002, separately, a coronavirus was modified to destroy human lung tissue and cause blood clots. And there's a patent associated with that. And Dr. Ralph Barrick's name is on it. And in 2015, they figured out how to take a bad coronavirus and have it infect a human being. So the technology about cross-species transfer and the weaponizing the actual payload of this virus to destroy human lungs, and then figure out a way to have it infect human beings, all done by Dr. Ralph Barrick. But in 2010, he created the antidote. I would assume that even sociopaths don't want to die themselves or the people they care about. So they created a way to control or turn off the threat of this virus using zinc ionophores and zinc. And so this was premeditated. And then last year, when doctors like myself, out of necessity because we had dying patients, came up with these types of solutions, immediately, as if it was choreographed, access to these medications was suppressed. Knowledge about these medications was suppressed. Doctors who were advocating for their use were deplatformed. And so what's very telling to me is that in New South Wales in Australia, doctors that prescribe hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin go to jail for 6 months. And they tell you why.
Why?
Because it encourages vaccine hesitancy. The implication is that these drugs actually work, and because they work, people choose not to take the vaccine because they're getting better with these drugs, and for that reason, doctors are being incarcerated. So the real agenda was to create a weapon of mass destruction, do enough carnage and damage on humanity to scare the planet, to basically lock down, wear a face diaper, and not be seeing the people you love. And what's happened is a global psychosis. People become mentally ill, and they're easy to manipulate.
True.
To take the vaccine. It's always been about taking this vaccine, and it's not for medical reasons, because why would children who have a near 100% chance of recovery from COVID without treatment be put into such danger with something that kills 100 more children for every one child that would die from the COVID? So the vaccines are 100 times more lethal to children, and they're still getting it. And it's not because of the health, obviously not health reasons. And so what we're really dealing with is a device, and this is all patent evidence for that, that is to deliver a certain capability and technology into 7 billion people. And what that device is, and this is not science fiction, there's a patent that actually, which my presentation today I brought up. There's a patent that describes technology already in the vaccines that allow for the measurement of biometric data, which means heart rate, respiratory rate, and temperature, and transmit that data to a third party with your location. That's all explained in 50 pages of complex nanotechnology engineering. And then there's another patent that links biometric data transmission to cryptocurrency.
Which the patent number was what, 2006060606.
And so what's happening in China, which is a good model for what's going to be globally, is China, the central banks in China have issued a digital yuan currency. They've outlawed all other cryptocurrencies.
You think that's what's going to happen in the US?
Well, they're going to try, and they've linked the cryptocurrency to a social credit score system. So what is really going on is the mechanics of global enslavement.
And your rating, your credit score will go down if you're not complying with the vaccines. Is that right?
You won't be able to participate in the economy without having that technology in you, because you have to basically forget about Apple Pay. You're going to scan your hand, and so if you choose not to participate by not taking the technology delivery system, which is this vaccine, you'll be excluded from commerce. So I don't have to put a bullet in your head; it just prevent you from buying bread. Or, let's say the government doesn't like what I say, that has happened, so they either restrict or block my ability to participate in the new cryptocurrency system, which is going to be controlled by a few global powers, according to the World Economic Forum.
That's amazing. And maybe we're being forced out for a reason. In Revelation chapter 14, it says, Babylon the Great is fallen. Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her plagues.
It definitely sounds, it's even like the mark of the beast, I would say. That unless you have the mark, you can't buy stuff. And so there is the only solution is resistance, and just saying no. Taking your kids out of harm's way from the public school system, and basically coalescing with like-minded people to build, metaphorically speaking, cities of refuge amongst continents of tyranny.
Hi, it's Jonathan. I hope you're really enjoying this series. I've had a pleasure to create it with these amazing experts, and I'm so glad that we can deliver this to you. Another reminder to let you know that we are getting closer to closing down our program, so I don't want you to miss out on all the gifts, all the bonuses, all the amazing abilities to interact with us and to learn from our experts by owning these materials, reading the transcripts, getting the 50 full-length interviews, the transcripts, the audios, so that you can read along, getting the full 9 episodes, or actually all 12 episodes. So episodes 10, 11, and 12 are all part of the gold package, for example. The 16 special reports that go through all the subject areas that we've outlined, the 5-part mini-series, another topic that we've created, some amazing tools that we have inside of this program to help people with COVID, vaccine injury recovery, autoimmune disease, even brain health and immune system health. These are some of the cutting edge tools that are inside of our program that you'll have access to. The printed books and DVDs are also part of the program. If you'd like to get those, they'll be sent out to you. And I just don't want you to miss out on that at the 71% off discount, as well as the $900 plus of free gifts. And so you can learn more about that by simply clicking below with the buttons or the banner just below this video to get started, to place your order before we close down the program. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Dr. Andy Wakefield, it's a privilege to sit with you finally. We've been talking about getting on camera. Well, I've been asking you, and I'm really grateful that we can get this time. It's right now we're at an event, it's the end of the event, and you're willing to do this.
COVID is an extraordinary situation that's really, it's paradoxical. There's a good side to COVID and there's a bad side to COVID. We know the bad side to COVID is that it was man-made. It was created in a lab in Wuhan. It was done through gain-of-function studies, which people have come to understand the meaning of that now, giving qualities, characteristics to a virus that it didn't previously possess, to make it, in this case, more dangerous, to make it into a bioweapon. And that's now become accepted even in those who were most resistant to it. The idea that this was initiated by research that was going on in the United States, that was then made illegal in the United States because scientists wrote and said, you do not know what you're doing. This is one of the most dangerous things you could do, is to mess with nature, to make these viruses more dangerous. They will get out. Nature will find a way, and the price that mankind will pay is going to be terrible. Tony Fauci, who was the architect of allowing these studies to take place, considered that it was worth the risk. I wonder how he feels about that now. So inevitably, the virus got out. The money was funded out, it was sent from the NIH via Peter Daszak over to the Wuhan lab. It was made it was put towards gain of function research. The virus, it did escape. We'll never know whether that virus got out of the Wuhan lab deliberately or by accident. It doesn't matter now. We won't find out, because the Chinese for sure are not about to tell us. But the fact is, it's led to a global meltdown. It's led to economic catastrophe. It's led to misery for so many ordinary people. Economic catastrophe, illness, depression, the disruption of the natural process of childhood. I mean, it's just an extraordinary consequence for something that should never, ever have happened. The upside to it is that people have come to understand that government, that the pharmaceutical industry, that vaccine makers, that the regulators are not on their side. People have woken. When I started this work back there 30 years ago, there were a handful of us concerned about vaccine safety, concerned about health freedoms, concerned about bodily autonomy, concerned about the safety studies that had not been done on these vaccines, particularly in the context of childhood vaccines. Now it's half the world. So the audience for our message has gone from a handful of people to half the world. And that is why they are so panicked. They do not know how to deal with that. And all they can do in those circumstances where a lot of people are saying, no, we don't want this vaccine, is to force them by dint of losing their jobs, their employment, their income, not being able to eat, not being able to feed their families. That's what they are doing now. And when you are on that course of coercion, of forcing people to do something against their will, that's a road that is inevitably going to lead to failure. And that's where they're going. So the upside to all of this is the world has woken up. They tried to pull a fast one on everybody. They tried to create an environment in which we were subservient to the message of the politicians, who were in turn subservient to the edict handed down by the pharmaceutical companies, who become so powerful that they thought that we would capitulate. They thought that they could win this. They can't. And we've seen a massive uprising against it. And that can only be a good thing, because once you've breached that trust, once people have lost confidence in public health policymakers, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's no regaining that trust. And now people will be forever skeptical, forever vigilant about the messages that they are delivered about the vaccines and vaccine safety and how good they are for you, and this is the greatest thing we've ever done. And people will shake their heads and say no.
That's a good point. I appreciate that perspective. I remember talking to you about the fact that you were going, you wouldn't go to media a lot because they would just kind of try to crucify you on air, but you would kind of occasionally do these appearances. Did you find it a hard time getting on air when it was, I guess the ad breaks are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies? The whole thing is under, like BlackRock is the owner of Moderna and Pfizer and CNN and Fox, and so it kind of makes sense that when you get on the show, it's not to praise your work, it's to crucify you. Did you ever have those circumstances where like you couldn't really defend your case properly, or what? Oh,
absolutely. No, I went through many interviews where, in the beginning, it was quite interesting. The media was not averse to debating vaccine safety. But when it became clear to those people who controlled the media, those people who were heavily invested in the media, like the vaccine manufacturers, the people who sponsored their programs, the people who sponsored their shows, their network TV news programs with many ads for pharmaceuticals in this country, then they started to panic when they realized that the message was getting out there that perhaps vaccines weren't safe. Perhaps here we have a guy who's got a credible scientific and medical background delivering a message at great risk to himself that these are not necessarily safe or effective, that they are harming children, and that harm has gone deliberately unacknowledged, unrecognized. And so they started to panic. And then we saw at the beginning of the cancel culture, So then we saw an intermediary stage of the really aggressive, hostile, attacking kind of Anderson Cooper interview, where I remember doing one with him where he wanted me to admit. His job, he'd set himself the challenge of getting me to admit on camera that I'd committed scientific fraud. I'd never committed scientific fraud, and I wasn't about to admit it. But he was getting hysterical. He was literally screaming at me. I was in Jamaica. It was on a Zoom call, I think, and he was, or on Skype, and he was screaming at me from his end, urging me to fall on my sword and admit that it was extraordinary. I'd never heard anything like it. And suddenly they yanked him off, and Gupta came on instead, the TV doctor, came on instead and started all over again. Dr. Wakefield, it was,
good cop.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. Now that was never going to make it into any TV interview because there was their top guy, Anderson Cooper, having a meltdown. He had like a childish tantrum in the middle of the thing. And
so it didn't get aired?
No, it did get aired, but only after they'd heavily redacted, cut out Cooper having this extraordinary meltdown. It was a wonderful moment. I just thought, wow. And I realized that he'd set himself this objective. They kind of patted him on the back and said, Anderson, get out there and nail him. Get him to admit it. And he was going.
It's probably designed to have you have to react to him and kind of lash out at him, and then to go, oh, look at this whack job, right?
Yes.
Look at the way he speaks.
I think that's right. And I've never committed scientific fraud. So I sat there and calmly answered his questions to the extent that I could, because he kept interrupting. And in the end, Dr. Gupta came on, and perfectly reasonable, and we started all over again.
Nice guy.
Oh yeah, no, it was laughable, and you wonder or stop wondering why CNN are in the doldrums, why nobody watches them anymore. And I saw that same graphic that you saw. Rogan was up here with millions and millions and millions, and they were down here, and it was pathetic. And that's mainstream media. And who are people listening to? Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, who used to be skeptical, quite rightly, about vaccine safety, thinking that, where's the problem? They wouldn't be giving them to us if they weren't good for us. Completely come around now and saying, actually, there's a problem here, and we need to know more about it. And COVID has woken him up to that. And so people are listening to people like Joe Rogan now, and CNN are irrelevant.
True, yeah. And there's obviously this certain portion of the population that still get most of their media, and I have relatives and friends still in those circles, and I feel bad that they can't see through it, and I feel it's to their detriment. There was this show, Don't Look Up. I didn't bother watching this stuff, but it was Leonardo DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, but the media institution was called RIP Media, which is actually Rest in Peace Media, meaning that the media was telling people not to be afraid of the comet that was coming to destroy Earth. And so they were just kind of seeking to ease people, so it's called Rest in Peace Media. And it was a play on words of the fact that this is what's happening, where the media is like coaxing us into our death in terms of, everyone go and get this shot, it's safe and effective, get all your 50 boosters, and you're being coaxed into your death. It's like the death media. So hence why it's like, I can't watch this. This is the extinction of the human race to watch this, but it appears that the people behind this are nefarious. Do you have commentary on the potential for? Do you think it's just a money objective, or do you think that harming people? Did they do something like harming people intentionally?
I think it operates on many levels. The motivation for what is happening now amongst those who are organizing, coordinating, initiating, those who are driving the agenda, it operates on many levels. There are many people who clearly have a stated aim of achieving a global government, of minimizing the power and the impact of the American economy on global infrastructure, on changing that dynamic and putting the control of the world, if you like, in the hands of a few effectively oligarchs, and having them, that's their system, control world government. That's a stated aim. I mean, we're not, there's nothing conspiracy theory about any of that. It just is what it is. And so that is a sort of a philosophical view of how practically the world is run from this point forward. And money may not have money as its primary motive. It may be, it's like Karl Marx. This is how it should be, and this is how we're going to run it and set up the infrastructure going forward. And I don't suppose Karl Marx was particularly motivated by financial gain, but he had a view of the world. Then there are those for whom financial gain is clearly top of their agenda. And that are companies like Pfizer and Moderna who are answerable to only one thing, and that is their stockholders. They are answerable to their stockholders, and therefore nothing else matters other than delivering on the financials. And that's how their executives are judged and upon which they get their bonuses. Those people aren't interested in the long term. They don't care about the longevity of Pfizer or Moderna, or the vaccine, or the injuries caused. What they care about is their bonus. Once they get their bonus, and I think from Moderna there have been, 5 billionaires made out of Moderna so far? I think that was the statistic. That's their concern. It's a smash and grab, get out, run, doesn't matter about the long term for those people. So there is a ruthless, unambiguous, and amoral sort of structure to that. So it operates on various levels. Then you've got the doctors who get or the hospital infrastructure that gets bonuses. They get paid if they admit a patient with coronavirus infection and label it COVID. That's one set of payments. Then if they put them in the ICU, it's a second. If they put them on a ventilator, that's a third set of payments. If the patient dies, I mean, there is money at every level in this disease, and labeling it as they do. And so there's a financial benefit, there's the salvation of the hospital structure, whatever it is for that, and the doctors get paid accordingly.
All at the expense of the people.
And then there's the level of the populace, the need to believe in someone, the need to believe in the man in the white coat, the need to believe that the CDC and FDA are working for them, the taxpayers who fund them. It's that the government loves them. That's the saddest thing of all, because none of that's true, and we've learned that. And Bobby Kennedy's articulated this beautifully. The way in which the regulatory agencies have been bought, have been co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry, who've become so powerful. They made so much money that they were able to buy politicians. They were able to write policy. They were able to buy the regulators, the FDA, the CDC, the people who were meant to govern oversight, to have oversight over these drug companies, to regulate them, then became co-opted as sort of subservient to the pharmaceutical industry. They bought medical training, they bought medical students, they bought medical journals, they bought doctors, they owned everything. And that was a big problem, because then it put them in a position that when we have a global pandemic of a coronavirus, as we are experiencing right now, apparently, then they are in a position to dictate to the government, to the regulators, to the doctors, how we should handle that. And so vaccines became the only agenda for the prevention, for the amelioration of this pandemic. All of those treatments which we know to be safe, much safer and effective, to have been proven by scientific study to be effective, which can prevent deaths from coronavirus infection, could have saved, of the 800,000 that they've said have been killed by this disease, 700,000 might have been saved by the judicious use of these drugs like ivermectin, like hydroxychloroquine, budesonide. That wasn't allowed. Why? Because Tony Fauci was pushing a vaccine and vaccine-only agenda. It had to be the vaccine. If they had these drugs that worked, that were effective, they couldn't have an emergency use authorization. It wouldn't have been able to operate in the face of drugs that actually worked. So they had to be denounced, those drugs.
If Big Pharma has the power to manipulate authorities around the world to carry out such an evil agenda for their financial gain, there's no telling where and when they'll draw the line. Our only defense is to stand up against them collectively by relying on the truth. We need to question everything they're saying and think about what makes sense and what doesn't quite add up. This is a fight between the men in the white coats versus the holistic healers who know that the immune system was engineered by God to function without the intervention of these dangerous lab-grown vaccines. The former is money-driven and the latter is person-centered. Who do you trust more? Next, we'll share clips from COVID-19, a second opinion Senate hearing, where Dr. Paul Marik shares his testimony about how he was told not to prescribe life-saving medicines to his ICU patients and how he was forced to watch them die and couldn't do a thing to help them. And when he tried to sue the system for their monstrosities, they responded by ending his medical career. Doctors Pierre Corey, Richard Urso, Aaron Cariati, and Peter McCullough add to Dr. Marik's testimony by discussing how physicians were stripped of their autonomy and were told to prescribe drugs to kill patients instead, and not to prescribe drugs that proved to be life-saving, all to boost the numbers of the COVID-related deaths to push their agenda. Following the Senate hearing is Dr. Brian Ardis. He talks about how Anthony Fauci published a mandated drug hospital protocol for all COVID-19 Americans that had failed in 4 human trials. He goes into detail about the real agenda behind the pandemic and how medicines have been used for COVID patients despite the obvious damage that they're causing.
Because we mentioned hospitals, I can get this back on track because we really jumped ahead to vaccines, and we got hours to talk about vaccine efficacy, safety, all type of thing. I want to polish off hospital care because I think it's extremely important. It's certainly, as I'm hearing from people, some of those heart-wrenching stories I'm hearing where a loved one's in the hospital and the family's begging the hospital to do more, trying to save the person's life, and they're just being told, "Now your loved one, there's not much hope. Get ready for the worst," and they just won't do anything. So I want to start the question out: what freedoms do you give up when you get admitted to the hospital? And is this a new phenomenon, or has this always been true? Because it seems like when you hear, Dr. Corey's well aware of this because he's involved in the lawsuits of families taking hospitals to court to administer, one of the unnameable drugs, and even under court order, the hospitals won't do it, and the people just die. I am the champion. I am the author. I'm the champion of right to try legislation, which gives patients and their doctors the right to try an unapproved drug. And yet, Americans haven't been able to access fully approved drugs with decades of safety profile. What has gone off the rail here? So again, I want you hospitalists here, the people that actually probably misusing the term, has this always been the case? Have you always lost all your freedom? You just turn yourself over to the hospital and you have no rights and you can't even sometimes get checked out? I know Dr. McCullough, you were just involved in a case sending somebody from a manufacturer, somebody from Minnesota down to, I guess it was Dr. Verone.
Let's hear as an ethicist about rights of patients.
Physicians have always appropriately been granted discretionary latitude to exercise their own medical judgment. There are treatment recommendations from medical societies, from CDC, from all kinds of different sources that we can take into account when treating our patients. But every patient is a new textbook. Every patient is a unique human being that has unique factors that only we and the patient really understand with sufficient depth to make difficult medical judgments. And this is the first time in my career, I think the other clinical physicians in the room would agree, where I've worried about, is somebody going to be looking over my shoulder asking me why I've prescribed fluvoxamine for this indication rather than that indication? I prescribe it for depression, no problem. Are you giving this to treat COVID? Why should it matter to you? So it induced.
So you're saying this is the first time in your
the last 2 years.
Is that true?
The last 2 years. Now, there are things that hospital administrators do that have annoyed physicians for years. But the kind of hamstringing of physicians in terms of doing what we believe to be the right and best and good for this vulnerable patient in front of me right now, that is my only responsibility as a physician, this patient who has placed their trust in me as their physician to do what is best for them and not be acting as the agent of a social program or a state program or any other interest that could compromise.
So talk about the historic role of these agencies and the relationship to doctors, and how did that change? And let's leave the pharmaceutical company capture of these things out of the equation here.
They are advisory, and the CDC is not the nation's super doctor. And I'm going to scandalize a lot of people by saying the CDC is not a medical organization. It's a public health organization focused on infectious disease spread. And they can do modeling, they can do epidemiology, they can give, obviously, recommendations on that issue. But in terms of how to best treat this particular patient in front of me, they are not the experts. The CDC published a list of contraindications to vaccines that has been taken by healthcare institutions to be complete and definitive. The CDC never meant and would openly acknowledge this is not a comprehensive list of reasons to avoid the vaccine.
Isn't it true that health agencies should be, they should be working for the doctors? They should be providing you information. They shouldn't be dictating to you.
And they should.
They're supportive of
Yes,
your.
and that's a two-way street. They should be listening to doctors, the doctors on the front lines that see firsthand what's going on, that gain valuable clinical experience as things that were tested in highly controlled settings with smaller numbers of patients are put out to broader numbers of patients. These agencies need that feedback from frontline physicians. So it has to be a relationship of mutuality, and ultimately all the work has to be for the benefit of the patient. Economic, financial, and other perverse incentives and other interests cannot play a role in these deliberations.
Dr. Merrick.
Yeah, so I can address this personally because this is a personal issue for me. So just to make the point that what's happening now is completely unprecedented in the history of medicine and across the world. We have the federal government, we have state agencies and hospitals telling doctors how to practice medicine. They're interfering with the sacred patient-physician relationship. They are telling doctors to be doctors. So I can tell you what happened to me. So I was using our protocol to treat critically ill patients in the ICU with a whole host of repurposed drugs. This is a memo. This is a memo sent to the entire healthcare system, but they targeted me personally. And what did this memo say? This said, I can use remdesivir, and then I will quote. There was an added section, do not endorse section, which includes medications that may cause harm and efficacy is not supported in peer-reviewed, published RCTs. These medications will not be verified or dispensed for the prevention or treatment of COVID. This list includes ivermectin, bicalutamide, etoposide, fluvoxamine, dutasteride, and finasteride. And then just to stick it to me, they added ascorbic acid.
Otherwise known as...
The healthcare system was effectively
vitamins.
preventing me treating my patients according to my best clinical judgment. And then how did this progress? I objected. So the first week I was in the ICU, I didn't know what to do. What was I to do? My hands were tied. As a clinician, for the first time in my entire career, I could not be a doctor. I could not treat patients the way I had to be to treat patients. I had 7 COVID patients, including a 31-year-old woman. I was not allowed to treat these people. I had to stand by idly. I had to stand by idly watching these people die. I then tried to sue the system. And you know what they did? They did something called peer sham review. It is a disgusting and evil concept. They then accused me of 7 most outrageous crimes that I had committed, and that I was such a severe threat to the safety of patients, they immediately suspended my hospital privileges because I posed such an outright threat to these patients, ignoring the fact that under my care, the mortality was 50%, those of my colleagues. I then went on through the sham peer review. I went to a kangaroo court where they continued this, and the end result was I lost my hospital privilege and was reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. So here I was standing up for patients' rights, and this hospital, this evil hospital, ended my medical career. So that's what they do. It's an outright outrage. It's evil to the core.
What?
Dr.
Why?
Merrick, Dr.
Why?
Merrick,
Why did they do that?
Just one second, Dr. Merrick. Did any of those cases that you were reviewed on, were they non-COVID cases? Were they pneumococcal pneumonia cases or staph sepsis where you used a broad range of your clinical skills?
These were all patients with COVID.
So it was specific to COVID, not any other condition where you would use your broad range of clinical skills. It was only on COVID
Absolutely.
that the review was applied, and it was applied in a way that was basically expressing and advising therapeutic nihilism, which means for the American public, therapeutic nihilism means the denial of treatment in patients in need.
This is the document which was sent to the entire healthcare system, which is the COVID-19 Comprehensive Treatment Guideline, which specifically was targeted at me, preventing me from prescribing safe, effective, off-label drugs. It's unprecedented in the history of medicine. The hospital is telling me how to practice medicine. They're denying me the right to use safe and effective drugs and lying because they claim
you can use safe, effective, off-label drugs for other conditions outside COVID.
Absolutely. Yeah. If this was pneumococcal pneumonia, this wouldn't be an issue. This is specifically for COVID.
So let me ask the question, how has the hospital treatment of patients advanced, improved over the last 2 years?
So, sorry to continue. So it's a terrible thing for me to say. I'm an intensivist. I've worked in the ICU for 35 years. Hospitals have become dangerous places for sick people. Patients must do whatever they can to avoid the hospital. When they're imprisoned in a hospital, they denied their rights. They are not allowed a patient advocate. Their family are denied access to the patient. They are prisoners in the system. They have no rights, and they get the treatment dictated by the hospital. They are dangerous places for sick people. And that's, for me, as a physician practicing hospital medicine for 40 years, saddens me to the core.
Yeah. There have been two advances. One is many hospitals are finally using steroids and sometimes sufficiently dosed steroids against COVID. In the beginning, they wouldn't even do that, even though it's clearly an inflammatory condition in the lung when it gets to that phase of the illness. The other advance that was made in the hospital is intubated patients get turned over on their stomach. Prone position patients apparently did better on ventilators.
That was actually really discovered very early on, correct?
And they were discovered very early on. That's right. Another thing that patients in the hospitals and their families were denied was the basic human good of burying the dead. I don't know if folks are aware of this, but in the early days of the pandemic, a theoretical risk that maybe a corpse might somehow, even though it contradicted all known science on respiratory viruses, somehow still spread COVID. I mean, this is a very weird paranoid thought. Caused many health departments, with the support of the CDC, to refuse to give the body back to the family. The bodies were the bodies were incinerated basically, and they would give you the ashes, whether or not whether you wanted a burial or not. One of the most painful conversations I had in the hospital, as the head of the ethics committee, I had a lot of conversations with families whose loved ones were dying of COVID, and this was a case of a patient irretrievably at that point dying of COVID. The family had finally come to accept that difficult reality that the patient wasn't going to survive the hospitalization. And then they asked about help for funeral arrangements, and the social worker told them, no, I'm sorry, we can't give your loved one back to you. We can't give the remains back to you because the health department won't allow it. So this theoretical, nonsensical risk that obviously turned out to be false anyway was placed above that basic human good of burying the dead. No sane society in the history of humankind since the days of Antigone has ever done this to people.
So again, I want to just kind of do the timeline. Again, early on, there was so much we didn't know, and we were all, well, Dr. Earls was shaking his hand.
No, that's not true, Senator. We
Okay.
knew early on. We had treatment early on, from the very first day in March.
Yes.
That's a fabricated lie. It's scientific fraud to say that. There was treatment for inflammation. There was treatment for blood clotting. There was even treatment that we could try for the virus. There's treatment for respiratory demise. It was definitely options.
But again.
And so as we went on, as he just talked, and I don't want to interrupt, but just let me kind of cover on this. The respiratory viruses are gone in 5 to 7 days. To say that this corpse could contain this respiratory virus a month or two later is ridiculous. So it's been a fraud from the beginning, and I don't understand why, but to go to just one more quick thing, the NIH, the CDC, and the FDA are not involved in medical education. We went through a residency, a medical school, a residency program. We have colleagues, mentors, people that we rely on. I've seen 300,000 patients. I've never called the FDA, the NIH, or the CDC one time for advice. It's not who we call. So to have them dictate our medical practices has to stop. It should not ever have been done. We've got to find a way to fight back. The public knows that hospitals are dangerous places, like Dr. Merrick said, and we've got to reinvent the wheel, basically, because our current system is the corporate practice of medicine telling doctors what to do when we already know what to do. There's a nuance, and we know it. Each and every patient has a slight potential thing that we might do differently. And if we don't do that, we are not good doctors.
Again, so what I want to know is this completely a new phenomenon where the federal health agencies are really dictating how doctors, or was this a slow creep?
So historically, just a quick history. I'll let Pierre talk, but the quick history is, historically, I was very closely aligned with the hospitals, and it was more like hospitals and doctors were, the CEO of 2 major hospital systems were very good friends of mine in Houston. One was my next door neighbor, and one was a good friend from medical school. Bottom line is, we were with the hospitals. It felt like a partnership, and we kind of felt like the insurers were the other side of things, like we were kind of us against them. But the hospitals started pooling together, they started building these big organizations, and now they are the most powerful entity in medical care for us. And so we have to deal with them.
Again, so this creep started with the consolidation of these hospitals.
Correct.
That decided, this is how we're going to, through our hospital chain, here are the protocols we're going to follow.
And
While this is cost-driven, this is a cheaper way, this is a more efficient or effective way.
Can I speak to that for a second? Because I want to say that prior to COVID, I did see some of this starting to happen. I was a clinical leader in a major U.S. institution, an academic medical center, and I started to hear these echoes of standardize. So there's this push to standardization. Now, the problem with that is a patient is not a car. Hospitals are not factories. Dr. Cariotti spoke very eloquently about that beautiful mystery of a patient and the phase of disease and illness and all their host of comorbidities and predilections and medicines. It's a very complex problem that we have to solve. There is no standard solution. That push towards standardization that was beginning before COVID, hyper-accelerated into some sort of totalitarian top-down control of the practice of medicine. Dr. Marek just spoke about it. The autonomy, the freedom, the liberty to make decisions using your decades of expertise and experience was removed. You were told to use this drug at this dose for this duration. I've never seen that happening. It's unprecedented. And I have to call out one particular point, because if you want to talk about hospital medicine, how far we've advanced, my strongly held expert opinion, as someone who's been treating COVID in hospitals and ICUs for now almost 2 years, is that the proximate cause of death of nearly everyone in the hospital is the severe, persistent, and pervasive underdosing of corticosteroids. The standard NIH-recommended guideline dose is dexamethasone at a dose of 6 milligrams a day. That dose is less than I give my 80-year-old patients with emphysema who are wheezing. These are patients on ventilators, whited out lungs with almost no gas exchange capacity left, and we're giving them anemic and pathetic doses of steroids, and they die. They die and they die, and they keep coming into my ICU, and I look at their record of what they were treated with in the hospital, and they're stuck on this anemic dose of steroids. So why would that happen? Why would that happen? Why aren't doctors thinking and saying they're sicker and escalating doses? I don't know why. It's this totalitarianism. And I also, again, Senator, forgive me, I'm going to call out the C word again, the corruption. Because it is my strongly held belief as an expert that this dose that was tested in a major trial, which made corticosteroids the standard of care worldwide, and I also want to give praise to Senator Johnson. You know, Senator Johnson invited me to give testimony in the Senate in May of 2020. And I remember my first conversation with him when he reached out. He was so enthusiastic about hearing about the work that Dr. Marek and myself were doing, that we were putting out protocols and we were trying to treat this disease. You know, and he said he couldn't understand why the system wasn't reacting, why the entire system wasn't reacting the way we were. And I remember he told me, he goes, you know, I want the doctors to take their gloves off. And they're not. They were sitting idly by the bedside. Institutions were paralyzed, waiting for randomized controlled trials to be done. And then finally, a randomized control. And at that time, I testified to the world that corticosteroids were critical in the treatment of this disease. Nothing happened until a trial came out 8 weeks later and proved the life-saving properties of corticosteroids. But that dose that was tested was ridiculous. It was the lowest dose. And the dose that's being used helps the few and fails the many. We now have almost a dozen trials testing higher doses of different drugs. We know, we have lots of evidence to show that methylprednisolone, which is another corticosteroid, is far superior to dexamethasone. We know that higher doses of that work better, yet the system just chugs on. And so it's my belief that low dose was tested for one reason only. I think it was a corrupt exercise, and I'll tell you why. And this corruption has now been well described. They fix trials. They can design trials to fail, to disprove the use of cheap medicines, and they can make things appear that they don't work. I believe that that low dose, which is perpetrated and propagated worldwide in the care of the COVID patient, was held artificially low so that they could leave room for much more expensive and novel and patented cytokine blockers so that they can enforce the use of more expensive and profitable medicine. And again, I'm just going to keep doing it all day until the people listen, until we understand we can upend the system. It's a corrupt exercise. The practice of medicine has been corrupted. It's been co-opted and corrupted.
And Pierre, the mortality in the 6 milligram prednisone dose in the recovery trial was 22%. Unacceptably high. The idea that we are going to take 6 milligrams of dexamethasone and hold it out with a standard of a 22% mortality rate from a single trial is malfeasance. It's medical malfeasance. Any good doctor would use the principles of use of corticosteroids and find a more appropriate dose, as Dr. Marek and Corey.
Senator Johnson, it's very important on the why question to look at the way in which the CMS, Medicare, Medicaid payment structures have created perverse incentives for hospitals, and the hospital administrators looking at those reimbursements. the way in which a COVID hospitalization was paid more than someone with the exact same problem, exact same symptoms than another hospitalization. So I go treat a 22-year-old woman who's in the hospital for suicidality and a positive COVID test. And so she's in isolation, has 0 COVID symptoms. She shouldn't be on the medicine floor. She should be on the psychiatric ward. But the hospital's getting paid a lot more for that hospitalization simply because she had a positive PCR test. The same perverse incentives are working in terms of the novel drugs like remdesivir that were ran through the approval process. Once Medicare, once they go through the approval and Medicare decides they're going to pay for them, that becomes quote unquote standard of care. Third-party payers, the private insurance companies, will follow suit. So Medicare really sort of sets the table and sets the rules by which the hospitals operate financially, and the other third-party payers that reimburse the hospitals follow suit. So until we can look at the CMS issues, I think and follow the funding, I think we're going to be left scratching our heads wondering why are these institutions behaving this way.
And over a next 3-month period is when COVID reached into the United States and into Texas. And in May of 2020 is when I became aware of the death tolls of all COVID-19 Americans, and then the statistics worldwide and how we compared to everyone else, only to find out we had way more deaths than any other country in the world. And I set out to find out why in May 2020, only to discover that Anthony Fauci of the NIH had actually published a mandated drug hospital protocol for all COVID-19 Americans. And that protocol was just one drug that was an antiviral experimental drug, never FDA approved before. In fact, it was failed in 4 human trials against other viruses in the past. But he quoted the reason why he was going to use this one experimental drug is because it was proven safe and effective against the Ebola virus in a trial in Africa a year earlier. And I just happened to click the study that he was hyperlinking in his statement on the NIH's website, only to discover that there were 4 drugs in that study, and Anthony Fauci flat out lied to all of you. I mean, to everybody, to the whole world. That drug not only was found to be not safe and effective, it was found to be the most dangerous and deadly of the 4 experimental drugs in that study. It also was the only drug that killed over 50% of everybody they gave the drug to. So the fact that he stated this drug was found safe and effective against the Ebola virus, so now we're going to use it against this new coronavirus, was a flat out lie. And then I wanted to know, this is all within about 5 minutes of discovering his mandated protocol, then I wanted to know, can I figure out that Anthony Fauci actually knew how dangerous remdesivir was from that trial? Or maybe he had an advisor that just told him it behaved well in that trial and you need to use it, and then he took bad advice. Well, all I did was go back to the study in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I scrolled up to the bottom only to find out that there was only one person in the entire world who funded the entire 1-year study against the Ebola virus in Africa using remdesivir. And it was Anthony Fauci alone. So Anthony Fauci actually knew that remdesivir was found to be the only drug in Africa that had a death rate of over 50% of everyone they pumped that drug into. Halfway through the study, it was so dangerous, they took all Africans for the remaining part of the year. They no longer gave access to remdesivir to be used in that trial because it was so dangerous. So my question was, why would he select a drug from a study that he's quoting? Why would he quote a lie stating it was proven safe and effective when in fact it was proven to be the least effective and the most dangerous to the lives of those people? What was being reported and is what is being reported today. We're 2 years into this pandemic, 1.5 years of me talking about this same topic. It has been purported that the virus called SARS-CoV-2, given a nickname COVID-19, that this virus causes acute kidney failure, liver failure, and heart failure as complications to the virus. It doesn't. Those are all side effects of remdesivir, the drug. And I've got proof of the studies that Gilead has been allowed, the maker of remdesivir, to contribute to science research papers defining what the virus does in the human body. Why in the world should they have been invited early on in the pandemic, the maker of remdesivir, to actually allow to project to the world what the virus does in the human body? All doctors treating patients for COVID-19 and this virus are going to be using one drug only, or they're going to be fired. It's called remdesivir. The makers of remdesivir were allowed to contribute to this actual paper that is now published on Nature Medicine that states the virus causes lung disease, heart disease, kidney failure, and liver failure. No, it doesn't. Remdesivir causes that. Remdesivir causes heart failure. It's proven by a cardiology journal just in October of this year that it has every known side effect of the supposed virus. It's because it's remdesivir poisoning. It actually damages and kills the mitochondria of the cells in the heart. It also causes acute kidney failure and liver failure. It's actually published as side effects on the NIH's own website for remdesivir. So I have been nonstop in the media helping people to understand the virus is not what's killing people. The majority of people dying in America is not from a virus being spread to people or going into children that they easily get rid of. Most children live throughout any respiratory viruses of any kind, including this one. The actual deaths have been perpetuated, accelerated, and exaggerated. And they're using numbers of people being killed in hospitals with a drug called remdesivir. And then they are telling people in the media, including all of you on this phone call, that these people in America are dying from a virus. No, they're not. They're dying from the treatment from the supposed virus. And they're saying to the masses, more and more people every day are dying from complications of COVID-19 in hospitals. Well, look at their death certificates. It actually states they're dying from complications of the SARS-CoV-2 virus or COVID-19. Second cause of death is acute kidney failure. Third is secondary pneumonia. You just have to know, when you shut down the kidneys of someone with a drug like remdesivir, you flood their lungs with water, and then the medical profession and hospitals are being told to call it COVID pneumonia. It's not COVID pneumonia. It's pulmonary edema. It's pulmonary means lungs. Edema means water. The kidneys release water from the body in the form of urine. When you shut them down with the drug, the actual water accumulates in the abdomen, then into your heart, and then into your lungs, and you drown these people to death and you have to vent them. So I have been nonstop in the media since May 2020 trying to warn the entire world that you are all being lied to. The virus was never as deadly as they're telling you it was. The worst place on the planet you can go is into a hospital. They have protocols put in to act and are being incentivized. Those hospitals are being paid by our own CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They have a 20% bonus payout to all hospitals in this country. If you'll just poison all Medicare patients with remdesivir, we'll give you a 20% bonus payout rather than treating them with some other drug proven to be more safe or effective. So I've been trying to warn people nonstop, and we have documentation on all of this. And anyway, that's what I do. I spend all my time now in speaking engagements. I'm in the media nonstop. We're testifying before legislatures in multiple states because we want to bring an awareness to people of the truth. You do not have to fear COVID-19 or any of its variants, particularly children or anyone younger than 50. Amazingly, on this chart, there is a second drug that's either approved or under evaluation, and that second drug is ivermectin, which every hospital in America is telling you is not approved. Well, per this NIH chart, it's just as approved or under evaluation as remdesivir is. It actually gives you the doses for how to treat all adults diagnosed with COVID-19 in hospitals. But look at the adverse events section, the column just to the right. No mention of liver failure, no mention of kidney failure. Very first bullet point, generally well tolerated. Interesting. Ivermectin's on the NIH's list of approved or under evaluation drugs during this pandemic. It's on the list with remdesivir, but ivermectin has no renal toxicity or liver toxicity. So my question is why would all hospitals only be using remdesivir, which causes heart failure, kidney failure, and liver failure? Why? This is why. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is incentivizing all hospitals with a 20% bonus payout if they'll just drug all Medicare-aged COVID-19 hospitalized patients with remdesivir instead of the other drugs on that NIH chart. This is the actual link on CMS.gov's website, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Under the CARES Act, you'll see here, NCTAP claims are those that are eligible for the 20% bonus payout under the 37110 section of the CARES Act. And then it gives you the codes for this. There's 2 bullet points that are eligible for all Medicare age-treated COVID-19 patients hospitalized in America. If you get a diagnosis of COVID-19, Medicare will pay the hospitals, just with the diagnosis, a 20% bonus payout. And they give you the codes here on this chart. For all hospitals, second bullet point, these are the codes for using remdesivir. If you'll just drug our Medicare age patients with remdesivir instead of ivermectin or any other drugs, we'll give you a 20% bonus payout. I call that murder for hire, personally. You're incentivizing hospitals to use a drug that causes acute kidney failure, liver failure, and heart failure instead of a drug like ivermectin that's FDA approved and has been for 20 years now that has no side effects of heart failure, kidney failure, and liver failure. I find this very criminal, and I hold this individual responsible. Not only is Anthony Fauci, in my mind, the greatest serial killer of all time on American soil, he's doing it right now too during this entire COVID pandemic. This is his accomplice, number 2. And they should be prosecuted, I believe. This is Chiquita Brooks Lasore. She is the head administrator of Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and everyone should be demanding her resignation and then prosecute her for murder for hire for all hospitals. That is my personal opinion. If remdesivir is the cure-all, be-all savior for all COVID-19 hospitalized patients in America, why in the world is any organization compensating hospitals with a bribe of a 20% bonus payout to drug innocent Americans with that one drug? If it's really so safe and it is so effective, why do we have to bribe hospitals to use it with an additional payout? Makes no sense to me. Shouldn't make any sense to you either.
Big Pharma and medical bodies are threatened by people who know the truth, who want to fight for the truth because it throws their agenda off the rails. Next, we'll uncover how the government and Big Pharma are manipulating data about the injuries that the vaccines have caused and continue to cause in order to continue promoting their lie about the vaccines being safe and effective. We'll hear from Brianne Dressen, a powerful advocate who shares her story to save thousands from getting the vaccine, and she talks about how Big Pharma tried to pay her to keep quiet about her vaccine-related injury. We'll conclude our episode with Steve Kirsch, an expert in data collection and research, who also shares insight into Big Pharma and the government scheme to censor the truth about the real vaccine injuries and deaths in order to continue promoting these vaccines to carry out their hidden agenda. Thank you, Brianne, for taking the time. So, Brianne Dressen, you are an advocate. You're someone that's standing with the people. You're a brave woman. You've used your voice powerfully. You've not cowered and gone into the shadows. You've come out like a lion, and a lot of people have gained so much hope and courage. And I believe that your story has prevented thousands upon thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people from going straight down hook, line, and sinker, or maybe people that got a shot but then didn't get their second shot, but maybe people that got their 2 shots but didn't get a booster. Your story has made a difference. So firstly, I just want to thank you for that work that you've done.
Thank you so much.
And tell me, so tell me about what happened with the injury. You were part of the AstraZeneca clinical trial. Correct me if I'm wrong. AstraZeneca has over $1 billion in criminal offenses. One of those charges was corrupting clinical trial data. Is that true from your research?
Yes, so first-hand experience obviously, should trump any other. So there were 266 cases that were adverse events that were not accounted for, and they don't show up in the appendix. And this is in the publication for the AstraZeneca clinical trial with over 30,000 participants, published by the New England Journal of Medicine. Also, in the first couple of pages, they talk about how they tracked patients for 730 days, all patients with serious adverse events for 730 days. They stopped contacting me at day 60. So if we're actually going to discuss what actually happened with the clinical trials, if we're not tracking the people that had serious adverse events for the amount of time that we are telling people that we are, I do believe that should lead into question what's happening to the data.
So how long did they say they were tracking people for?
730 days, 730 days.
But you were tracked only up until 60 days and no further. Was that the same with others, or were you just somebody that missed accidentally?
Well, as far as the clinical trials go, it is kind of challenging to find others in the clinical trials because we can't talk to each other, we don't know each other.
You've obviously put the call out, though.
Yes, absolutely. And I appealed to the New England Journal of Medicine directly to let them know about the discrepancies in the study, and they refused to rectify the situation. I filed a complaint with the FDA, and now I'm in the process of filing a complaint directly with AstraZeneca. Also with AstraZeneca, they are obligated to pay all of my medical expenses, and I am one of the very, very few in the United States that is allowed legally to get compensation from the drug companies. The vast majority of everybody else, every single person in the public rollout, cannot get a dime from the drug companies. Also, they cannot get a dime from the federal government, even though in the history of vaccines, the government has compensated those that have been injured by the COVID vaccines.
Like the $4.3 billion that was paid to vaccine-injured families by the U.S. Vaccine Court.
Yes, correct. We're not on that fund. So here we are over a year into this, the vaccine rollout. That still has not been rectified. And it's not because the federal representatives, the senators and the congresspeople, it's not that they don't know, because we've let them know and we've been asking and begging for them to rectify the situation, add a bill that puts the COVID vaccines onto the compensation program, and it hasn't happened yet. So it's just one more drop in the bucket of we're totally on our own and we need some help and support. So with the clinical trial, we've been begging them for compensation. We had to refinance our house. We had to hire a nanny. I mean, we were a sinking ship for months. All the time, all this while, no compensation came from the drug company. They called me in July after the first news story on my case ran, July 7th, and they said, hey, we're ready to issue you a payment. I said, great. They offered me $590. So I said, I'm hoping that's missing a couple of zeros. I denied the payment, and I said, go back and come back with a number that makes sense. They wired the money to my account anyway, without my consent. And then I never heard from them again. Even though I followed up with them, I was like, that's not okay, you know, where's the rest of the money that you owe us? Because $590 is pretty cheap. Because $590 is not a reasonable amount. So we didn't hear from them again.
Kind of I mean, what was the feeling like when you got, was it an email saying $590? What was the feeling?
Like I was less than human. And it's just one more time that we felt less than human. And that's what's unreal about what's happened here today at this event. Because for the first time in over a year, I feel like a person, which is unreal. Anyway, so
tell me, what is it and why? Why do you feel that way?
Because we're scum. We've been told we're scum for over a year. So we're anti-vax garbage, even though we got vaccinated. Our doctors don't believe us. They don't trust us. It's really tragic what's happened to these people. So it's just strange to all of a sudden feel love and support from people after. Because we just thought that we were doing what we were supposed to. We did what the government asked us to do to protect our fellow man. It's like kind of ironic that it didn't do that. But it's just insult to injury that we did what we were supposed to do, and now all of a sudden we're public enemy number one. And we're just caught in the middle. You've got the two sides that are fighting, and we're being drowned out by all their noise. And all we need is just some people to look and to listen and to help us. So after that last donation, I never heard from the drug company again. Another news article ran in December, and I heard from the drug company in December, and they made me a final settlement offer of $1,243. And to get the $1,243, I needed to sign away all future payments, and I needed to release the drug company of any liability. I denied that, obviously, and I haven't heard back from them. So as far as for sure I know for a fact, AstraZeneca does not have people's best interest at heart. It's about the dollar. And after talking to other clinical trial participants like Maddie DeGarry, who's the injured 13-year-old from the clinical trials for Pfizer, same issue there too. So her data has been skewed.
Which clinical trial was she in?
Pfizer for 12 to 15-year-old.
What was it like for you seeing her case of what happened to her?
Of all the cases that we've heard, just to take a little step back and to add some context, the vaccine injured were like family. We've been stripped of all of our dignity, and there's something that happens to the human spirit when that happens. When we find each other, we're completely vulnerable, we're lost, we're scared, and so it's incredible to find a community that's welcoming and will bring us in and support us and to help us heal. So when we are able to gather at events like this, it is incredibly healing for those that are suffering and sick. It's an incredible experience because it's like a family reunion, but the good kind of family, you know. So with that said, I know Maddie very well. We talk all the time. I mean, we text all the time, talk to her mom all the time.
And you weren't in the same clinical trial, so you just became friends because of what Senator Ron Johnson's press conference?
No, so actually both of those press conferences that Senator Johnson put on, I was able to be the one to coordinate all the vaccine injured. So these are all people that I had known for months already. So that was great. So
because you were bringing together this, you were spearheading this.
Yeah, so we were.
Thank you for your work.
It takes a lot of us. I mean, there's a lot of people that are afraid to come forward, and so they do a lot of work behind the scenes, under the guise of secrecy. And so I'm just one person in this big wheel that needs to move, and it needs to move faster because we're up against a monster of a system and money that's keeping us sick. It's an incredible amount of power that's pushing us down and keeping our voices from being heard. So these kids, when they come into our groups, they're lost, they're scared, they're suffering. Maddie DeGarry's case, of all of the kids' cases that we have, hers is like the most mismanaged of all of them. And so whenever I talk to her, she's getting worse. She's not getting better. She's already confined to a wheelchair. She already has a feeding tube. That kid needs help, and she needs real help. Not just people saying, oh, that's so sad, pat on the back, go away. Like, she needs people to help her.
And it costs money.
And it costs a lot of money. And so, we realized the government's not going to help us. We have to do it ourselves. And so that's when we launched react19.org. And one of the big things that we have is we have a bank account that's set aside just for the COVID vaccine injured. So all of the donations that we're raising from this event, every single dollar put into that fund is going directly into the hands of the vaccine injured, like Maddie DeGarry, who needs to travel across the country so she can actually get the treatment that she needs.
Jonathan Otto here with Steve Kirsch, very much a brilliant mind in regard to assessing data and very much a whistleblower in the public arena in regard to collecting the data on adverse events when it was very critical as well, like the work that you and Dr. Malone did and Dr. Weinstein. It was a critical moment in history, and your assessment of bringing that data out was impeccable. So thank you for your service, and now at this point, could you just for a moment explain your background to camera? Like, I know that your philanthropy work, the fact that you funded COVID-19 related treatments. Could you just share a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive in. I got a couple of really good questions to ask you.
Sure. My background is in high tech. I've been starting and running high tech companies for the last 45 years or so, and so when COVID hit, then I looked around to look for market opportunities, saying how could I make a difference? And I spoke to scientists, and they said early treatment was the fastest, safest, and cheapest way to end the pandemic. So I started funding early treatment studies, and the NIH ignored it, and then we got vaccinated because they said it was safe and effective, and I found out a month after I had been doubly vaccinated that my friends were either dying or injured from the vaccine. And so I started looking into the science, and I found out that the vaccines were just horrible in terms of the safety and efficacy, and that we were being lied to.
Did Dr. Robert Malone feel the same way? Did he get the shot and feel that he regretted that?
I don't know. I think he I think he got the shot just so he could travel, and he would be not restricted in terms of traveling. I don't know if he looked at all the science before he got the shot. I think he didn't, and we didn't know. You know, he basically trusted the authorities, just like most people do. And it's only if you see firsthand vaccine victims from your friends that you start to say, maybe they're not telling me the truth. And what we found was that it wasn't like, oh, they just missed something. It's like there are 1 million adverse events reported in the VAERS system. It's more than every other vaccine in history in the last 70 years. Combined, right. And yet the CDC says there's no safety signal there. They can't find a safety signal. Well, I found over 5,000 safety signals in 5,000 different symptoms that were elevated after the vaccine, but they can't even tell even if a single person has died. You know, so that says to me that either they're grossly incompetent, which I don't believe, or they're basically looking the other way. And when people die and their autopsies say he was killed by the vaccine, they say, well, we're still investigating that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, good point. But they never do investigate it. Is that right? Like, I haven't heard of any families say, yeah, an autopsy was done on me and my family, one of my family members. I've read about a couple of cases which are very damning toward the vaccine in terms of the autopsies that were done. But I've never heard people inputting the data or like filing a VAERS report, or a healthcare worker filing the adverse or the death report, and then that being followed up in an autopsy being done or anything like this.
Well, yeah, the CDC will never do an autopsy. It's the family that does the autopsy, and when the family does the autopsy and it comes back and it says, oh, this person actually died from the vaccine, then the CDC says, oh, thank you for letting us know that. We'll investigate. And so whenever you talk to them about any of these people who the autopsy determines was killed by the vaccine, the CDC says, well, we're still investigating that. So they've got 20,000 deaths reported in the VAERS system. They haven't found a single one. And yet pathologists who look at just a handful, 15 deaths, they find that over 90% of those deaths were caused by the vaccine. So how could a pathologist look at just 15 and say it's over 90%, and yet the CDC looks at 20,000 and finds no safety signal? This is corruption. And it's corruption, it's confirmed corruption, because we have Maddie DeGarry, and she's a 12-year-old. She was in the Pfizer phase 3 clinical trial for 12 to 15-year-olds. She took the second shot of Pfizer, and she couldn't walk off the bus less than 22 hours after she got the shot. And that can't happen. She's a perfectly healthy 12-year-old. If it wasn't the vaccine that injured her, then what was? Well, the FDA promised to investigate, but they did nothing. They didn't even call her. Nobody called her. The CDC didn't call her. The NIH didn't call her. The FDA didn't call her. And yet this was clinical trial fraud. Everybody is basing this on the clinical trials, basing these mandates on, well, the clinical trials showed no deaths. But here you have one child out of 1,000 who's paralyzed for life, and they didn't investigate that. In fact, they didn't even report it.
It was reported as a tummy ache, was that right?
Yeah, it was a stomach ache. So there's no question there's corruption. You can't say, yes, we promise to investigate, and then never call the mom to even ask about it or to correct the record. Like, how could the record not be corrected? The medical records are there. It's very clear she was vaccine injured, and yet it's not reported it's just reported as a stomach ache.
Yeah. Willful misconduct. All right. Everything points towards willful misconduct.
There is no, on Maddie DeGarry, there is no doubt that it is willful misconduct. There absolutely no doubt. They basically do not They did not follow up. And for something this important, where, oh my gosh, we're relying on these clinical trials, and there's fraud in the clinical trials, and you show them there's fraud, and we know there's fraud, and they promise to investigate the fraud, and they do nothing, that's corrupt. And when we told John Su, who calculates the underreporting factor for the VAERS system, he's always been reporting the VAERS events as if that's it. There were just 3 events out of millions of vaccines. Well, the 3 events turns into maybe 3 times 40 or 3 times 100. So it's what was 3 events is really 300 events, or maybe it's 120 events. But he never talks about, well, we always have to multiply VAERS because it's underreported by a factor. Here's how you calculate the factor. He just says, well, there are only a few cases reported in the VAERS system. And that's unethical. He knows, he absolutely knows that there's an underreporting factor, and they absolutely do not talk about it at all in the public hearings in front of the committees. And when you...
Because it was the government that funded the Harvard.
They don't want to look they don't want to make the vaccines look bad. Their mission is to vaccinate everyone in the US. And if they told the truth, nobody would get the vaccine. So they have to basically lie by not reporting the data correctly. They'll say, hey, there were 4 events in the VAERS system out of 1 million vaccinations, or 500 million vaccinations. There were just 4 events. But that's true. But that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is you have to multiply it by probably 100 to get the true actual number of events that represents. And they just leave that part out. So they're not lying, because they say, well, the number of events was this, but they're not telling you the truth that, oh, well, that really represents 100 times more than just that number.
Thank you for sharing, Steve, and thank you for your advocacy. I think some of the, to get you out of the cold and get you into back to the hotel you're staying at here, I think probably the last thing I'd ask you would be in regard to Omicron is out now. They're obviously trying to boost us up. They're trying to get the children vaccinated. Right. They're going for younger age groups. Right. I believe they're going for the 0 to 5-year-olds.
Yeah, because their goal is to, if they can vaccinate the kids and get approval on the kids, then if you get approval on the kids' vaccines, then you get immunity for the adult vaccine. So it's basically go after the kids, get approval for the kids, and then you have liability protection for all your doses, and you can vaccinate until, for decades to come before they figure out what's going on.
And poor health will become so indiscernible. I mean, I have some concerns around the fact that children get vaccinated day 1 with the Hep B shot. I think that's just the most absurd.
All of the vaccines are dangerous. I mean,
I think you've changed your tune.
Yeah, I mean, the CDC is supposed to look at vaccine safety every couple of years, and they don't do it. And they were caught in court not doing it, and they're still not doing it. And that's not...
yeah, well, we're trying to work.
They shouldn't be doing it. They don't do it because they know if they did it, it would disclose that the vaccines are dangerous. I mean, the kids that don't get vaccinated at all are uniformly healthier than the kids who do get vaccinated.
Dr. Paul Thomas's studies are showing that, and which are fascinating. I just interviewed again with him just a week ago, and he's now emphatically saying, absolutely, I've had over 100,000 children through my clinic, and I've studied vaccinated. I've even studied partially vaccinated versus not vaccinated at all, and the not vaccinated children are far healthier.
Correct.
This is important data for people to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's no question when you actually look at the data, and that what happens if you publish a paper and it says that, hey, the unvaccinated kids are healthier than the vaccinated kids, you'll find that your paper doesn't get published, or there will be threats against your funding, and they'll make your life miserable if you do anything that suggests that these vaccines are not incredibly healthy. So
yeah, and even you speaking the way you're speaking right now, you've I do think you've changed your tune from the last time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And that's huge, because that takes humility. That takes kind of looking back at some of your previous sentiments and beliefs.
It just took Bobby Kennedy. I met with the people at Children's Health Defense, and I said, so which vaccines are the safest? And they said, well, there aren't any safe vaccines. And I said, what? That's not what I was told, right? Because most people never look into the safety of vaccines. It's not something that you do. You basically trust the authorities because your doctor told you, oh, have you been through this childhood vaccination schedule? And all the doctors are just programmed to do that, but they don't look at any of the data, and they don't look at the papers, and any paper you get published gets retracted because of threats and all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
So you're not seeing the truth, and so nobody is seeing the truth, and it's being withheld. And this is why we have autism problem in the United States is the childhood vaccine schedule.
I appreciate you speaking directly on that. Thank you for that. I mean, this is great information. People need to know this because what's going to happen is people will get off the COVID shots, but then they'll stay on the flu shots,
exactly,
and then they're going to get you.
Exactly. Yep.
And
they're
going to get you.
Yeah.
And because they can actually change ingredients in vaccines.
Sure.
They can add and subtract thimerosal without having to let you know. That's surprising.
Right. Yeah. And thimerosal, they on the CDC website. I mean, here's another example of corruption: is thimerosal. On the CDC website, it says, well, the thimerosal gets out of your bloodstream within a week or so, and it's all eliminated. That's true. It goes and gets deposited into your brain. But they never say that part. See, that's the thing. They know it goes out of your blood and gets put into your brain, but they just say, hey, it gets eliminated from your blood. They don't say, oh, and it ends up in your brain, where it can cause all sorts of neurological problems.
Aluminum would do the same thing, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Aluminum is in the flu shot.
It's not natural. I mean, there's a video that was produced by the Gates Foundation that said, oh, the anti-vaxxers say that there's aluminum and it's only a small amount, and you eat more in a day than is injected into your body. Well, when it goes into your mouth, it goes in and out. It never goes into your bloodstream. But here, you're injecting into your bloodstream. That's a whole different ballgame. And, so this instructional video that says how to talk to an anti-vaxxer and how to debunk an anti-vaxxer is in itself an example of misinformation from the other side, where it's the aluminum is less than what I eat in a day. But they never pointed out that there's a difference between what you eat and what gets injected into your vein.
Is the flu shot a driving force behind dementia?
I don't know the answer to that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And now you're taking on the dreaded title of anti-vaxxer. How do you feel about that?
It's probably accurate in that the vaccines are not safe.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for a safe vaccine.
So no longer is that dreaded title like, I don't want to say that I'm anti-vax, is not a sentence that is coming out of your mouth anymore, or just not something that you feel compelled to say?
Yeah, because I feel like I am anti-vax, and my car's going. I feel that it is accurate that I'm not for these vaccines because they're just unsafe.
That clearly shows that the pandemic is part of a much larger agenda. The research, science, and experience of experts in the field all point out the fact that the pandemic is too well orchestrated to be a coincidence. Now more than ever, it's vital for us to look at the evidence and question what we're being told, to fight for our medical rights, and question what the media, Big Pharma, and the government are claiming to be true. In this episode, our experts uncovered the truth behind the real COVID agenda, from the hidden dangers of the vaccines, to boost Big Pharma's profits, to the use of the dangerous drugs for COVID patients that have proven to be harmful. It's clear that this pandemic is a mode for control and financial gain that Big Pharma and the government do not have people's well-being at heart. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for our following episode, our next episode, as we continue unraveling COVID secrets. Until next time. Wow, that was action-packed, and I really enjoy what the experts had to say and how they're preparing us to be able to fight what's in front of us every day and into the future. That's exactly why I believe that these are some of the leaders that we need to have in our home library to learn from them continually, to watch and rewatch, to share our favorite episodes with our friends. Get them to just watch a single episode of the one that connected most, that you think is most relevant to them. We have had these available for 24 hours per episode, free viewing. We want to give and get this to as many people as possible. And just know that when you own the program, then you get access to this forever. And so it's yours to own, censorship free, and it can never be taken away from you. It's in your own home. And that allows you to have information that you need when you need it. And it also supports us to continue this mission, to support you with future content as you'll be getting updates and new information, some access to some question and answer sessions with our experts inside of our program, and so much more. So simply click the buttons or the banners below, and that will get you inside of our program. And make sure to do that before we close this down. So thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you inside.